In the summer of 1847, beneath the sweltering Georgia sun, a secret festered within the walls of a grand plantation house, a secret so horrifying, so unthinkable, that even in an era built on brutality, it would make men turn away in disgust. This is not a story of heroes. There are no survivors to celebrate here, only witnesses to an evil that exceeded even the boundless cruelty of American slavery. Her name was recorded in ledgers, whispered in slave quarters, and buried in courthouse records that would remain sealed for over a century. They called her the breeding mistress. To the outside world, she was the epitome of Southern grace. Widow of a wealthy plantation owner, mother to 3 strapping sons who managed the family's 800 acres of cotton and tobacco. A woman of Christian virtue who attended church every Sunday, her Bible clutched tight against her chest. But inside those plantation walls, something far more sinister was unfolding. The neighboring plantations noticed something peculiar: the steady increase of mixed-race children born on her land. Not unusual in the antebellum South, white masters frequently raped enslaved women. But there was a pattern here, a deliberate, calculated pattern. And then came the detail that made everything wrong. The children, they looked like her. In 1849, 2 years after the peak of her operation, a traveling minister arrived at the plantation for Sunday service, Reverend Thomas Whitmore, a man whose conscience couldn't be bought. He noticed the children first, 17 of them, ages ranging from infants to adolescents, all bearing striking resemblances to the plantation mistress and her 3 adult sons. Abomination upon abomination. But it was the breeding ledger that sealed the horror. Hidden in the plantation office, Reverend Whitmore discovered a book. Not a typical slave inventory, though it contained those horrors too. No, this was something else entirely, a breeding record. Page after page detailed which enslaved women were assigned to which of her sons. Fertility tracked like livestock, birth dates recorded with clinical precision, and margin notes in her own handwriting describing the children's features, their value, their potential for future labor. She had turned human reproduction into a business model. And the fathers? Her own sons, forced into systematic rape of enslaved women under their mother's orders. Here's what makes this even darker, if that's possible. After the 1808 ban on importing enslaved Africans, the domestic slave trade exploded. Enslaved people in the Upper South were bred deliberately and sold to plantations in the Deep South. A healthy enslaved person could sell for $1,500, equivalent to $50,000 today. She had discovered a loophole in the already monstrous system. By using her own sons as breeding stock, she ensured genetic diversity while maintaining complete control. The children were legally her property, born into slavery through their mother's status. She could sell them, work them, or breed them in turn. In 5 years, she had increased her enslaved population by 34%, not through purchase, through forced reproduction. The plantation's value tripled, and every Sunday she sat in that church pew, singing hymns about salvation. We must ask the unbearable question: why did her sons comply? Court documents later revealed a household ruled by psychological terror. The eldest son, Marcus, was 28 when the breeding program began. The youngest, William, was only 19. They had grown up under her absolute authority. Their father, a man described as kind but weak, had died when they were young. She had raised them in isolation, homeschooling them on the plantation, rarely allowing outside contact, psychological control, financial dependence, and perhaps something even more disturbing. Some historians believe the abuse started much earlier, that the sons themselves may have been victims before they became perpetrators. But victimhood does not erase their crimes. 23 enslaved women, 17 documented children, countless acts of rape carried out over 5 years. They were both victims and monsters, and that complexity is almost unbearable to hold. Reverend Whitmore didn't go to local authorities. He knew they'd protect a wealthy white woman. Instead, he traveled north to Savannah, to an abolitionist lawyer who had been documenting slavery's worst atrocities. The lawyer, Benjamin Crawford, knew this case could change everything. Not just another story of plantation cruelty. This was systematic, documented, and involved white men who were also victims in a twisted way. But before Crawford could file charges, word reached the plantation. Someone had warned her. On March 3, 1000, 850, the plantation house burned to the ground. The fire started in the office where the breeding ledger was kept. Convenient, perhaps. Suspicious, certainly. She and her sons claimed it was an accident, a kitchen fire that spread. But 3 enslaved people died in that fire, locked in the cellar, and the breeding ledger was never recovered. Without the ledger, the case fell apart. Reverend Whitmore's testimony was deemed unreliable. He'd only seen the book for minutes. The enslaved women couldn't testify against whites under Georgia law. The prosecutor, a man who personally owned 47 enslaved people, saw no crime worth pursuing. Regrettable, he called it in his dismissal, but not illegal. A woman has the right to manage her property as she sees fit. Property. He called those women and children property. The case was closed within weeks. She was never charged. Her sons were never charged. They rebuilt the plantation house, continued operations for another 11 years, until the Civil War ended their reign. And here's the part that should haunt us. We only know this story because Reverend Whitmore wrote about it obsessively in his personal journals. He died in 1867, tormented by what he'd witnessed, and failed to stop. His journals weren't discovered until 1963. For 113 years, her secret stayed buried. The aftermath. What happened to the victims? After emancipation in 1865, most of the enslaved people on that plantation scattered. Some took the surname Freeman and headed north. Others vanished into sharecropping, which was often slavery by another name. We have records of only 3 of the 17 children surviving to adulthood. 3 out of 17. The plantation mistress died in 1869 at age 74. Her obituary called her a pillar of the community and a godly woman of impeccable character. Her sons? Marcus died in the war. William drank himself to death by 1872. The middle son, James, lived until 1891 and, according to tax records, never owned property again. He died in poverty, alone. Some might call that justice, but it's cold comfort to the women who suffered, to the children who were born into trauma, to the descendants who carry that legacy in their DNA. This story isn't just about one evil woman in 1847 Georgia. It's about systems that dehumanize people so completely that this could happen and be legal. It's about how we memorialize history. That plantation house? It stood until 1923. For decades after the Civil War, it was considered a historic landmark. Tours were given, its architectural beauty praised. Not one marker mentioned the breeding program. Not one. Here's what we must learn. First, slavery wasn't just about labor, it was about total ownership. Of bodies, of reproduction, of humanity itself. Until we face that completely, we cannot understand its full horror. Second, evil isn't always obvious. She went to church, smiled at neighbors, upheld social graces. Atrocity often wears a respectable face. Third, silence protects perpetrators. For 113 years, this story was hidden. How many others remain buried? What truths are we still afraid to speak? Fourth, trauma cascades through generations. The children born in that breeding program, those who survived, carried that horror into their bloodlines. Descendants today may not know their ancestors' stories, but they feel the weight. Fifth, we are morally responsible for bearing witness. The Reverend tried and failed to get justice, but he kept writing, kept documenting, kept insisting that truth mattered. Because of him, we know. And knowing means we can't look away. In 2012, a small memorial was placed on the land where that plantation once stood. It lists the names of the enslaved people who died there, or at least the names we have records of. 23 women's names are engraved in stone. 17 children's names, most marked only as infant because no one bothered to record them properly. And at the bottom, a single line: they were people. Remember them as such. This was Georgia's secret, America's secret. Now, it's our responsibility to make sure it's never forgotten. Final statistics and learning points. Historical context. Between 1808 to 1865, an estimated 1 million enslaved people were forcibly relocated from the Upper South to the Deep South in the domestic slave trade. Enslaved women were systematically raped by some estimates. Nearly 60% experienced sexual violence. Children born from these assaults were legally enslaved through the principle of partus sequitur ventrum. The child follows the condition of the mother. Established in Virginia law in 1662 and adopted throughout the South. The breeding economy. By the 1852, Virginia alone was exporting 6,000 enslaved people annually to the Deep South. Enslaved women of childbearing age were valued 20–30% higher than those who couldn't reproduce. This created deliberate breeding farms. Our story's Plantation was just one documented example, but historians believe dozens operated across the South. Why this story matters today. The genetic legacy of slavery's sexual violence is measurable. Studies show approximately 4% of white Americans have African ancestry they're unaware of, and nearly 30% of African Americans have European ancestry almost entirely through the paternal line, indicating rape rather than consensual relationships. These aren't just statistics. They're families torn apart, identities erased, and trauma embedded in DNA. The archival gap. An estimated 80% of plantation records were destroyed, either deliberately after the Civil War or through neglect. Many Southern families burned documents to hide evidence of crimes. What we know about slavery is a fraction of what occurred. Every documented case like this one likely represents dozens more that vanished from history. Modern implications. This story connects directly to ongoing struggles, reproductive justice, bodily autonomy, and how we teach history. When politicians ban books or restrict how slavery is taught, they're continuing the work that started with that burning ledger in 1850, erasing evidence of atrocity to protect a comfortable narrative. What you can do. Support organizations preserving slave narratives. Visit memorial sites. When you hear someone minimize slavery as just how things were, share stories like this. Make them uncomfortable. Truth should be uncomfortable. That discomfort is the beginning of accountability. The Reverend's final words. In his last journal entry before his death, Reverend Whitmore wrote, "I failed those women. But perhaps someone who reads this will not fail the next ones. Injustice always has witnesses. The question is whether we'll speak. Today, we speak. For the 23 women whose names we know. For the 17 children who deserve to simply be children. And for every person whose story was deliberately erased. Their lives mattered. Their suffering mattered. And our remembering matters. Never forget. Never repeat. Never be silent.